under immense strain include following: South Hills Tower and Pump Station, Crown Gardens, Commando System, Naturena, Midrand System, Alexander Park, as well as Santen Ilovo Reservoir System. Johannesburg Water is unable to pump most times, and residents in these supply zones are receiving intermittent to no water supply. To mitigate these water challenges, the entity has deployed a total of 50 roaming water tanker trucks and 56 stationary water tanks. While this may not replace potable water, this is how the entity to ensure residents have regular water supply. We are pumping water in Rahima Musa Mother and Child Hospital's roof tank to ensure patients have enough water supply, while the Helen Joseph Hospital is being fed directly through the tower system. Johannesburg Water regularly monitors the supply to both hospitals. Johannesburg Water has also been sending out communication twice a day to update resident ward councillors on the systems. We've also been having meetings with councillors to keep them updated. The city also implemented the annual level 1 water restriction that takes place from 1 September until 31st March. In order to sensitize residents to and raise awareness on the importance of water conservation. Under level 1 water restrictions, the watering of garden is prohibited between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. from 1 September to the 31st of March. Furthermore, residents are not permitted to wash paved areas and driveways using hose pipes. Instead, residents are encouraged to use grey water for that purpose. Simple water-saving habits residents can use to implement into their daily routine include not leaving water dripping, washing of cars on the grass with grey water, as this water, I think, was supposed to be, and this water lawns, and at the same time, I think it was watering of lawns and so on. Shortening showering time, but may be favorable for women, I think. But for us men, I think we must lower the time we take to shower. Using a glass of water to rinse when brushing your teeth, instead of allowing your tap to flow continuously. Taking shallow bath and avoiding filling up the bath to a depth greater than 100 millimeters. Reuse grey water to water gardens and pot plants. Fixing all leaking plumbing in the house. Furthermore, Rent Water has set up a joint operation committee which includes all the municipalities that are affected. That is having meetings twice a day to provide status updates and where the respective operations teams strategize on how to best reconfigure the system to ensure speedy recovery. Through our remote monitoring system, Joburg Water is able to closely monitor and respond to any service failure in all our water and sewer infrastructure 24/7, as and when is necessary. Alert the relevant technical teams on the reservoir levels. I think later the MD will come and give a technical information in terms of the level of reservoir across the city and how probably we have recovered so far. And perhaps maybe timelines, and if system goes well according to the plan, according to the way it is now, how long it can take us to fully recover. But the last message should be around the cooperation with community and including perhaps most certainly councillors on the ground. We have observed some messages circulating within media spaces, various councillors. Some messages are negative, contributing negative to the situation. We expect councillors to cooperate and work with us in terms of informing community, not to agitate residents against our own government. We must indicate that this system was not created by Joburg Water, as we all know, is Rent Water. We are trying by all means as Johannesburg Water to recover. It's difficult to recover in terms of water restoration, unlike electricity, where you switch it on, is on immediately. But water, colleagues, it takes time for this system to recover. At some stage depends in terms of where you are as a resident. Those high-lying areas and the low-lying areas, water will come differently to all of us. Thanks very much. MD.
Thank you, MMC, and good afternoon, colleagues. I'm going to be just giving you some more details around the areas that are affected within the City of Johannesburg. Some of you may be aware, some not, that the City of Johannesburg has about 128 systems. These systems are made of reservoirs and towers. And out of these 128 systems, I'm going to zoom into those areas where indeed we have been battling to stabilize the supply. we have, in the Midrand area, we are having challenges around Midrand area. And these challenges started, of course, more than a week back. In the main, it was the issue of the demand outstripping supply, which there were communication from our side to say, appealing to residents to reduce the supply. But unfortunately, the incident that MMC indicated for the power failure that happened at the bulk supply ended up affecting the recovery period. So as things stands there, we have 3 critical reservoirs which supplies greater Midrand area. Our reservoir, which supply called Grand Central Reservoir, which supplies part of Midrand, we've been seeing some recovery starting from yesterday when we started seeing the normal flow coming through. But however, as much as in that particular system we are seeing it recovering, the major challenge is still on the what we refer to as our Iran system, which supplies the larger part of Midrand. As much as there's water coming through to the reservoir, the challenge for now is that the reservoir level is still very low in such a way that we can't be able to pump to the tower. In terms of the timelines, we are expecting that by tomorrow, during the day, we should be starting to get to that point whereby we are stabilizing that particular system. And what do I mean by that? We should be at the point when by tomorrow during the day, where we are able to start pumping to the Iran tower, because that's the main area that's still left in terms of the Iran system. Still, we are on the Midrand reservoir, on the Midrand systems. We also have a system which supplies the greater Ivory Park area, which is our President Park reservoir and tower. Also there, we have not recovered, and in terms of our prediction, we're aiming that with the normal flow that we are seeing from our back supplier from yesterday, we should be in the position to also be seeing recovery happening from tomorrow. So that's the issue around the greater Midrand area. But I must also add, so that residents out there are able to know when we talk about errands, which area really does it supply. This is our reservoir which supplies the area like Somerset, Lone Hill, Norwich, Errand, and so on. Or basically, this is mainly, if we are going facing the Pretoria direction, this is the area that's on the left of the highway. So moving into the greater Sandton area, the Sandton area, we out of the 128 system that I've indicated that we have across the city. Part of it, of course, is the area that supplies part of the greater Sandton area, which is called Ilovo. That's the area where we're still battling. But I must indicate that in terms of the flow, there's water coming in and going out of the reservoir. We just need time for us to be able to start recovering that reservoir. So when I say we're still struggling, it doesn't necessarily mean that the entire zone doesn't have good water. You'll find that the low-lying area, people have water, simply because there's an inflow to the reservoir, and of course that water is going out again, supplying the area. But I must indicate, when you look at all the other reservoirs which supply greater Midrand, I mean, we've got Morningside Reservoir, Limbro Park Reservoir, Marlborough Reservoir, Bryanston, Randlaxton, all the reservoirs are at a normal level of 50% and above. So our only challenge really is mainly on the Illovo Reservoir, which supplied the area like Morningside all the way to Hyde Park, Athol and so on. And this is an area that our Butler supply opened the supply to that system yesterday at 1. And our aim is that also tomorrow we should be seeing that system starting to come back. Our aim is that we must start building the storage in our reservoir, because once we see levels going up, it simply means that the entire zone will be able to have water. So moving to other area that's affected, it's the linked fields area, which also, this is a system that we are aiming that with the stabilizing of the system, we should also be restoring water tomorrow in that particular area, by tomorrow in that particular area. And this is the area really that supplies the Orange Grove, Highlands North, and so on, those areas. So let me zoom in now to the south of Johannesburg. We've got two areas that are affected in the south of Johannesburg. The two areas in the main that are affected is the Crown Gardens. This is our reservoir, which supplies areas like Winchester Hills, area like Robert Sham, and so on. Currently, the system is still struggling for that particular reservoir, simply because the system that is linked to, or the reservoir that supplies that particular system from the rainwater side is still on the lower side. And as it's been indicated with MMC, there's ongoing engagement that's happening with all teams really within the Gauteng area, so that we can work together and get to a point where we stabilize this system. So our prediction around that system as to when are we be able to get back to normal, we should be able to get back to normal beginning of next week in that particular system, the Crown Gardens. We are looking at around Tuesday, Wednesday next week that we should be back to normal. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be water between now and then. Yes, area will still be experiencing the intermittent supply up to that point when we get to a point where we say we have been able to stabilize the system. If you look at the reservoir for the Crown Gardens, as of just before this media briefing, we're sitting at 22% capacity in terms of capacity. But unfortunately, because that level is not really high enough for us to be able to run the pumps, the tower zone, it was empty, which is the reason why I'm saying we need to, that particular system still needs some days for us to get to a point where we'll be able to pump on an ongoing basis. I must emphasize that as much as I'm saying Tuesday, it doesn't mean that the area won't have water until Tuesday. What it simply means is that we are only going to be at a point where the system is back to normal on Tuesday. From between now and then, we'll be operating the system. You'll find that the area is getting intermittent supply. In other words, we can't be able to run the pumps 24 hours of a day. So other times of a day, the tower won't necessarily have water. The other area that I want to zoom in, it's around the commando system, ladies and gentlemen. This is the system that's very problematic from our side as Johannesburg Water. It's very sensitive to any changes that happen on the bulk supply system. If there are any problems, this is the area where we really start seeing the challenges. In that particular system, we have three reservoirs: the Brixton Reservoir, Hestill Reservoirs, as well as Crosby Reservoirs, and a tower at Brixton. As of now, the tower for Brixton is full. Basically, the entire zone that's get water from the tower, they are having water. However, the reservoir itself for Brixton Those residents for that area, they are aware we've been sending communication out where we close it every night so that we can be able to build the storage. And at some other instances like today, we end up closing much earlier, like during the day, so that we're able to build the capacity and not lose the tower. So this particular system for command also, it's at the same category like Crown Gardens that I've indicated that our prediction is that we should only be moving or getting back to a normal water supply by towards mid next week. For a simple reason, this particular system as well, it relies a lot on levels of our bulk supplier. And as much as our bulk supplier, they're still going through the process of stabilizing their own supply system, we will carry on having this intermittent supply, but our aim is that by mid next week, that issue should be resolved. I must also indicate that this particular system, we've communicated before that we have other plans that we are busy with around investment that we are doing in that particular area so that we can be able to make sure that these weaknesses that we are there on the system whereby it relies mainly on the level of the bulk supplier, and we basically mitigate that. And around that, of course, there's work already happening in that particular area where we have appointed contractor who's busy building a reservoir and a new tower in Brixton area. So these are really the areas that I think is necessary for us to really zoom in around those part of the systems that are really struggling. You will have noticed that out of the 128 systems that we have in the city of Johannesburg, we are talking about 15 systems or so that we are really zooming in. The one that I've been really giving you details to say these are the systems that are experiencing challenges, and we are really managing them very closely. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Colleagues, please just your name and the news house you're representing. Can I take hands, please? 1, 2.
Could you just re-elucidate, Mark Napier, EGTA? If you could just rehash the factors responsible for the scarcity, and then how much water Johannesburg uses.
Heidi Johnson from the NCA. We've been covering the story quite extensively this whole week, so I just have a couple of questions. The first one being about the hospital. Gauteng Health has decided to take it upon themselves to give water to hospitals, especially Rottenmammusa and King Joseph. I've actually fully seen it. They've also decided to get private contractors because Joburg water tankers are so unreliable. What do you have to say about that, given that hospitals need water, they can't survive without it? So they cannot depend on Joburg water because of what's happening. They've also indicated that the current situation is unsustainable. So they've indicated that as much as they are finding alternative ways to get water supply to hospitals, they need to get water from the municipality. So I hear the statement, I read the statement, but what are the time frames that we're looking at? So that's only 2 questions. The third question, there's been concerns of possible acts of sabotage that are happening that could be leading to all these water cuts and people not having water due to an alleged lucrative tender process for water trucks. If you could tell us, are you aware of that, and how much the city is actually paying for these water tankers? And I think just more importantly, what is the time
So, colleagues, okay. So, Mark, you asked a question about the possible reason for the water shortages, followed by what is the actual consumption that Johannesburg Water, actually draws from the bulk supplier. So, Johannesburg Water, typically, on an average, we draw what we call system input volume. That's basically what Rand Water supplies us. It's typically about 1,550 megalitres a day. Obviously, with the change in season and consumption patterns, and we must also understand that, Gauteng is a province where lots of people flock to for opportunities, employment opportunities. Out of all the provinces, that's where, most people tend to flock to. So, given the number of people that are in Gauteng or in the city of Johannesburg in this particular instance, coupled with the weather conditions that we've been having, it's been relatively hot. In our industry, spring and summer is our peak season, so that means more water is consumed. And then obviously coupled with the other operational issues that the MD has alluded to in terms of electrical failures, etc., on the pumping and distribution side, have actually added to where we are at the moment. I think one needs to also understand that, while some people might actually not be increasing their consumption, we recognize that. There are certain customers or communities that are increasing in consumption, and that overall places a strain on the network.
Thank you. With regards to Rahima Musa and Helen Joseph?
Sure. So in terms of Rahima Musa and Helen Joseph, so these are the two key hospitals within our commando system. I'll start with Helen Joseph first. So Helen Joseph gets fed off what we call the Brixton Tower. We try and maintain the tower as full as possible so that we do not interrupt the roof tanks at Helen Joseph Hospital. That's been going relatively okay. There are times when, because of the levels in the reservoir, we may not be able to pump all the time. But we've never reached a stage during this process where Helen Joseph has run empty. They might have done, low levels in their tanks, but, we've been trying to keep the system full as possible. Rahima Musa is a bit different. Because of the low levels at our Crosby system, which typically feeds Rahima Musa, it's affected the volume of water going into their roof tanks. They do have roof tanks. At Rahima Musa, there's two big buildings. One is the main hospital building, where the patients get treated. There we are pumping using our contractors' pumping truck, supplemented by our contractors' water trucks, to pump water into their roof tanks so that the hospital section where patients are treated have access to water. There's a second building called the residence, which is much higher than this particular building, which is not linked to the main hospital building in terms of water supply, that's currently having challenges. We're unable to pump into that building, but safe to say where patients are being treated in the main hospital, we pump into their roof tanks. As we speak, we have our contractors' pumping units there that is pumping. We also have our contractors' water tankers that's feeding these pumps to make sure that they don't run dry.
Thank you. And with regards to the suspected sabotage with the tanker industry. Thank you.
Thanks, Nondumiso. We're not aware at all of the sabotage. I must indicate that you'll be aware that the issue around the system being under strain started beginning of the month already. And at that time, really, mainly as we indicated, was the issue of the demand increasing. And unfortunately, there were other incidents that happened this week that made things worse in terms of the power failure that has happened. So we're not really aware. You'll see that These are issues. In fact, the issue of the demand increasing is really even issues that we engage with our residents. But the issue of the power failure is not issues that are even happening within our system. It's issues that are happening, upstream in our bulk supplier. And in fact, we are the ones, not even our bulk supplier, who have a responsibility of making sure that we provide water tanker to our customers. It's not our bulk supplier. If there's anything, really we don't prefer the situation where we're using water tanker because it's costly. And secondly, it's a very complex operation for a big city like City of Johannesburg. So I don't think really there's anything like that, especially to say this sabotage is happening so that water tanker can be used. That I can say no, there's not something like that. Simply because you can see challenges are on the back supply. They're not even on our side. And we are the one who have to make sure that water tanks are used at the end of the day. I think that there was an issue around that was asked around the timelines as well. I think we haven't touched on that. Yes, time frames. So I'll separate it in terms of system that we know they are easy to recover. This is the Midrand and the Ilovo system, Greater Midrand, Greater Sandton, which we've indicated that those systems, we are expecting that by tomorrow we'll have recovered that system. When you say recover, we'll now be in a point where everybody within the zone has water around the clock. We have other systems that we know. They have other difficulties in terms of recovering them. This is the Crown Gardens in the south of Johannesburg, which I've indicated earlier, the area that it supplies. This is the commando system, which we know, the one which supplies the Brixton Reservoir, the Crosby Reservoir, as well as the Hest Hill reservoirs. Those are the systems that our timelines around recovering them is that we should be in the position where the supply is going back to normal by mid next week. And there are reasons for that. And that reason, part of it, is what I've explained to you to say, they have a very high dependency of our back supplier levels. Because those systems, in order for the lines, for example, the pipeline which supplies water to Brixton, Crosby, as well as Hestill, in order for that pipeline to bring enough volume, the reservoir for the back supply needs to be at a certain level. Then the pipeline that comes through Joburg is able to bring a sufficient volume. So it's a weakness that we have identified it as well, and we have other medium-term intervention that we are implementing because we are aware that it's not the way that system operates is not the best way currently, and hence we are investing about 430 million in terms of building bulk infrastructure in that particular area, which includes the bulk pipeline, the reservoirs, and the tower. And we are talking about initiative where we have contractors already on the ground to improve that particular infrastructure. I thought I should, above the issue of the short-term recovery of the system, I should give that detail as to what are we really doing about it for the system really to be operate normally in the long term. Thanks, Nondumis.
Thank you. Another round? Heidi, I've got noted you. Okay, go ahead.
MSC, this is maybe a question for you. I think residents are really panicking because if you have electricity, and by the way, load shedding is suspended for the weekend, so I think everyone's happy about that. But if you have electricity, you don't have water. If you have water, you don't have electricity. As the MNC, are you worried about the state of infrastructure, not just on the electricity front, but also water? Because we also told about the massive leaks in Joburg Water, and oftentimes, and I'm not trying to attack anybody. It's literally what residents are telling us, that they're told to use water sparingly, but they don't have water for 3-4 weeks, especially, for example, in South Hill. People don't have water. It's non-existent. don't have it, and then they get a bill of 3,000 rand, and then they can see the leaks happening. Are you worried about the infrastructure in the city? From your assessment as an MEC, and then maybe to Johannesburg Water, are you aggressively tackling burst pipes and leaks? Because that's a very big problem, and I'm sure you're losing a lot of water through that. Maybe if you can give us an indication of how much water you are losing because of burst pipes and leaks. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Heidi. Look, we are very much worried. In fact, I had a chat with MMC Finance yesterday that we should embark in a journey to galvanize funds across to fund the backlog within Johannesburg Water infrastructure maintenance plan. You are correct, we might be losing a couple of water through our leaks. That our infrastructure is very old, as you know, is aging. And I must indicate that at some stage, after this kind of setback, during this time you'll find that there's airlock within our pipes. And then when water comes, there's a contradiction between the air within the pipes and the water coming. And that pressure will identify a weak point. Some stage can go to identify any old pipe that is rusting, and there will be a couple of pipe bursts. But then we've realized that we can't keep on fixing point by point, because you fix it here, it will burst somewhere else along the very same line. We either invest more money in fixing the whole entire pipe system, but we are behind. I think there's a backlog that we must then deal with in Johannesburg. But not only in Johannesburg only, I think in City Power, our infrastructure is old. Look, it's very old, but we are worried. We can't. But when we say that residents must use water sparingly, we are not only referring to the current situation now. We are speaking generally from now going forward. It should be a habit on our own residents. We want to change the mindset of our people in terms of how they use water. We must indicate, MD, that at some stage, a couple of weeks ago, Rainwater was beginning to do some water cuts in Johannesburg. There's a concern that we're over-consuming in Johannesburg. So we can't. There's a number of kiloliters that we must use. Once we reach above, then we become penalized by Rainwater. So we have reached our own license requirement. But I think it's a general attitude that people must change. How we do our car wash in our own townships and everywhere. People are living, when you do bath your own, yourself, brushing your own teeth, you must use a cup, not just leave the... I'm saying, Heidi, don't just use the tap flowing full time while you are busy brushing, the tap is flowing. But with the usage of a cup, I think you're able to save. But if that attitude is practiced across, then we can save a very serious amount of water and will reduce the strain that we're having in Johannesburg. But generally, we're very much concerned. We will do that look around with the MMC Finance where we can get money, not only within the city, but everywhere, so that we can come back here and invest this money into this to address this backlog of infrastructure repair in Johannesburg. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe before Logan deals with that, our intervention around BES, if I can just add on this question, Heidi. I think our communication is not only targeted to those customers or residents that are affected. It's targeted to all residents of the city of Johannesburg. For a simple reason that the water system for the city of Johannesburg is one big system. It's one big system which supplies or which consumes about 1,550 megaliters a day. So, and hence I gave those numbers to say Johannesburg has 128 reservoirs and towers. And you will have followed that when we were taking you through the area that really going through difficulties right now. It's what we can, just go through them. I even said it's about 15 or so reservoirs that we are really monitoring closely. So our message really is also to appeal to those that are really having normal water supply to say, can you please reduce your demand? Because this is a one big system. Immediately, if the users of this one big system, all of us, we can come together and reduce demand, it helps in recovering the part of the system which is currently going through difficulties. So our message when we say, please, we use water sparingly, we're not necessarily talking to those that haven't got water. We're talking to those that have. Even to those that are within the supply system which is affected. Interesting enough, if you go to Ilovo supply zone, you go to Brixton supply zone, even though when the reservoir is open 50%, there's people who have water, those that are on the low-lying area. So our message is mainly to those to say, please, help us by reducing demand, because as you reduce, the system is able to build up pressure, and we're able to recover the reservoir soon. So I thought I should just add that aspect. Thanks. Okay.
So Heidi, you asked a question in terms of our water losses, and there was also a question regarding our turnaround for fixing these bursts and leaks. I'll deal with the first one. As Johannesburg Water, we have aging infrastructure. For a typical municipality our size, the infrastructure is quite varied, quite complex. We're sitting currently with about a 24% physical loss. That means that 24% of what the system input volume is, what we buy, is basically lost through leaks and bursts. But having said that, it's also, one must also consider there's leaking reservoirs, structures, there's underground leaks. There's also water that's lost when we flush lines to release air, especially when a system goes empty. And the similar process applies when you have to shut down a line, to drain the pipe, to empty it, so that we can perform repairs. So all of these compounded come up to roughly that 24% we're talking about. But we must also understand that the industry norm out there for a utility our size and vintage is roughly about 10%. 10% is about an acceptable level. There is a backlog of infrastructure, upgrades. It doesn't happen overnight. It requires a lot of resources, a lot of funding. It's very complex. Construction projects are long, and we're starting to slowly but surely, prioritize to catch up for that. In terms of our turnaround plan, yes, we do have leaks and bursts in the system. We had to reorganize resources. I think that's the most critical. Every region of Johannesburg has specific resources. We've had to now reorganize resources, put in more resources on the ground, more boots on the ground to deal with these bursts, repairs as quickly as possible, as well as the leaks that are reported. Together with that, we bring in extra resources, not just during working hours. Remember, we are 24/7-hour operation. So we don't just work during the working day. We work after hours and weekends and public holidays. We're mobilizing resources on the ground to make sure that these leaks and bursts are attended to within the shortest possible time frame. Thank you.
Thank you. Would that be all, colleagues? Well, thank you very much. And happy Heritage Week. We will have regular statements that the MD spoke to earlier on a twice-a-day basis, and we will be in touch throughout the weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
What